So it's Monday, December 28th, and we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year and to the new year, 2021. And that obviously means a ton of people are going to be making their New Year's resolutions. And that connects this video because a year ago, probably close to the day, I decided that I was going to read more books than I ever had over the course of this year. And today's video is going to be showcasing the top 5 books and a few honorable mentions. So coming in at number 5 is The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. You know, a book is absolutely going to blow your mind when it comes, and all it is just a white cover with black Times New Roman font on there. And it absolutely did blow my mind. It was a fantastic book. Every single chapter almost I had to stop and think about everything Julian Jaynes was presenting, and I just had to take a breather at some points. It was incredible. So the main focus of Julian Jaynes' theory is that we have a bicameral mind, which is just we have two halves of our brain, which is true. But his theory comes in and says that recently, within 5,000 years, one half of the brain was only in control of our bodily movements, while the other half of the brain told that half of the brain what to do. And in a way, that was essentially the voice inside of our head, but it was more disconnected. And he also thinks that this is how not only consciousness arose, but how religion did. It really goes into how every single person has essentially a God inside of their head, and that is the origins of religion, and eventually that God really becomes who we are and is now that voice inside of our head. It's an absolutely crazy theory. He goes through tons of information about the brain from all the way back in the most early ancient literature all the way to today. Number 4 is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I recently read this book, I want to say in September, and I actually did a video about it already, but it's coming up again because it's that good. So Marcus Aurelius was one of the best emperors in Rome's history, and he was very interested not only in the afterlife and philosophy, specifically Stoicism, but he's also very interested in being the best person that he could be. So anybody that knows who Marcus Aurelius is knows that he's associated with Stoicism. So I want to talk a little bit about that. It really boils down to these 3 points. It's that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge. The wise live in harmony with divine reason that governs nature and are indifferent to pleasure and pain. So this book is really like almost a self-help version of Stoicism, and it has just practical everyday knowledge on every single page, and there's quotes that will resonate with anybody. And you read them, it's a pretty amazing experience because these things that he's writing down were never meant to be published. He didn't write this book to have it distributed. It was a personal journal. And so you look into the mind of this emperor who is in control of one of the greatest empires ever, but who's also, battling with an internal dialogue with the afterlife, what comes after death. And it shows you that, he's just as human as you are, and he has these same worries and these same fears as you. And you get to peer into his head and learn how he dealt with them. Number 3 is Supernatural by Graham Hancock. Most of you, if you know who Graham Hancock is, you probably saw him or have seen him on the Joe Rogan Experience a few times. And he's been on there, and that's where I first heard about him. Graham Hancock is a very interesting character. So Graham Hancock's theories are often labeled pseudoscientific. He comes up as essentially a pseudoscientist if you look him up on Google, but I think this is a massive mischaracterization of what his work is really all about. So the main shot taken at Graham Hancock is that none of his work is peer-reviewed or in published journals. But of course, that doesn't necessarily prove the validity of something. And in recent times, he's actually been proven correct on some big-time theories. I'd say the biggest thing about Graham Hancock, and I've read a few of his books now, is that his evidence-based theories are oftentimes woven with speculation. So you have to be careful when reading them, and you have to be able to really focus and distinguish what he's talking about and whether or not he's speculating or whether or not he's proving with the evidence what happened. So Supernatural specifically focuses on the origin of consciousness and religion through the use of psychedelics. So now I want to briefly just go through his theory. First is that hunter-gatherers, being hunter-gatherers and moving around different countries, were bound to run into plants containing psilocybin. Once ingested, they'd have these crazy experiences seeing, abstract shapes and in some cases even different entities. And I'm not one to say that they are real or not, or just in the head, or in their brain, but either way, it was clearly influencing their behavior. Graham Hancock believes that it really broke a cognitive dam in the human brain, which led to abstract thinking, which leads to symbolism and language, and ultimately to the consciousness we're most familiar with today. To add on to that, he believed that many of these entities and stuff were the basis of religious figures. Number 2 is probably the most dense and academic book on this list, and it's Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So this book falls into a few different categories. Mainly, I would argue that it's a psychology book, but it also relates to statistics and economics. So the book starts off with an introduction of the two systems of the brain, the subconscious and conscious mind. The most important thing from this segment is that the unconscious mind lays the foundation for the beliefs of the conscious mind. So if you want to change what you believe consciously, something has to go on in the background. This book is packed with case studies, examples, and interactive activities that all help enforce the material. And it doesn't just help you, memorize the material, but it helps you understand it at a different level. And that's why it's had such an impact on me over this past year. The book has really laid the foundation for how I look at the human brain, how I see the ways that we make decisions, and how we formulate ideas. I want to give a warning here. This is an extremely dense book. It's not like a pleasure read. After reading this book, if you choose to pick it up, you will literally feel like you just took a college course. It's that packed with information, but it's absolutely worth the read, in my opinion. Before we get to number 1, I want to talk about 2 honorable mentions. One is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. I read this for my African American literature class this fall semester, and it was a great book. I really enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. One of the most important things I learned was that knowledge is the gateway to personal agency. Or in other words, the more you know, the more you can control your own life. Douglass goes through this exact same journey when he's learning how to read. And there's even parts of the book where he's trading bread for lessons from his fellow students on how to read. So he's literally trading his life source for knowledge. And this helps him understand why slavery isn't right. It helps him see and learn the different perspectives across the country and across the world. And from that, he writes that it made him unfit to be a slave. And that's exactly what he wanted to be. He wanted to be unfit. That eventually leads to him breaking out the courage to go and get out of there and get free and go to the North. And so his realization of knowledge leading to personal agency transformed his life and really led to his freedom. Another honorable mention is The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman. Now, this is a book that I read before starting this YouTube channel and everything, and it goes through so much information related to business. It's a great read for anybody looking to have a kind of a broad scope and broad perspective on business in general. It talks about finance, talks about advertising, talks about how to start a business, how to come up with an idea. All around, it's a great place to start if you're looking to start something. So coming in at number 1, and this was the only book on this list that I didn't have any trouble picking. And it's for number 1, The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. This book by Ernest Becker talks about the implications of consciousness and how consciousness led to the realization of our own death, and that no other organism even realizes that they are going to die. And this leads to what is known today as death anxiety, or I think what Ernest Becker considers or calls it in his book is the death stimulus. This leaves this organism, the human animal, in such a horrible spot. It knows it's going to die. It doesn't know what's coming after. It has no way to figure it out or avoid it or fix it. And so things have to keep it occupied. In his book, he writes how every single human activity is just to distract us from the fact that we are going to die. He continues diving into this whole death stimulus and starts talking about things like Soren Kierkegaard and how in this idea of transcendent transference. And essentially boiling it down, there's a few words. It's placing our worries onto something transcendent. It's transferring our own fears, specifically the fear of death, onto something like a god. So Ernest Becker really agrees with Soren Kierkegaard in the fact that the only way to get over this death stimulus is to either construct and invent a god and put all those worries on there, or that God exists and we just put those worries on him, and that's what we're supposed to do. Ernest Becker also brings to light many of the things that we do and kind of gives an explanation for why. One of them is taking drugs and, ingesting alcohol, not just every once in a while on the weekend, but really getting addicted to these things. Why is it that we do that? Becker shows that what's happening is that same part of the brain is being stimulated by drugs and alcohol as it would be stimulated by a religious experience. And so in a way, drugs and alcohol really replacing God and religion for many people. And I'm not one to say whether or not it's a good or bad thing, but it's something that we need to understand if we're going to be able to cope with it, essentially. Those are my top 5 books of the year. I'm going to be coming out with a video soon talking about how in this new year, 2021, we can start to figure out the meaning of our own lives. And one of the most important things, and it's absolutely going to be on that list, is reading more books, as it helps, expand our perspectives and learn about new people's experiences. And we can experience things, that might have transpired over decades. We can experience it in just a few hours. Reading books has been one of the most important and essential aspects of my life. And just last year, I really started getting into reading. So I encourage anybody that's watching this video around January, really whenever time you're watching it, whatever time during the year, it doesn't matter, to set a goal, maybe just this month, this week, or for the whole year, just to read a few more books. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what books you're excited for reading or if you have any recommendations for me. I'll catch you on the next one.